How to build a moon base. We've entered a new decade, and in this decade we're going to see a lot of changes as far as moon bases go. First of all, China and Russia claim that they will, by 2024-25, establish their moon bases on the south pole of the moon. How to build a moon base. This is on Conversation, written by lecturer in physics, Nottingham Trent University, Ian Whitaker, and Gareth Dorian, postdoctoral researcher, University of Birmingham, the UK. Half a century after humans first walked on the moon, a number of private companies and nations are planning to build permanent bases on the lunar surface, and despite the technological progress since the Apollo era, this will be extremely challenging. So how should we get started? It's not just the lunar bases, the moon bases. Russia wants to establish something like an ISS, a lunar station, orbiting the moon. Just like we have the ISS orbiting around the Earth, Russia wants to have a similar thing orbiting the moon, the lunar station. Now, the conditions, this is on the Conversation, the conditions on the lunar surface are, as we know, extreme. The moon has a 28-day rotation period, resulting in 2 weeks of continuous sunlight, followed by 2 weeks of darkness at most latitudes. And as the moon lacks any significant atmosphere to distribute heat from the sun, temperatures during the day can rise to 130 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the coldest nighttime temperatures have been recorded at minus 247 degrees Celsius. The lack of protective atmosphere also means there's little protection against the harmful UV and the cosmic radiation. This means moon inhabitants would have to construct buildings with walls that are sufficiently thick to block radiation coming from in and use cumbersome spacesuits when leaving the facility. The walls must also be strong enough to withstand the pressure differences between the outside and inside, and to cope with the impact of micrometeorites, the tiny specks of rocks and dust crashing into the surface at high speeds. These considerations mean that when we expand the first bases and start actually building structures on the moon, lunar concrete, which is a mixture of sulfur and aggregate grains or crushed rock, normal concrete is aggregate cement and water, would be a good option. That's because it's non-porous, strong, and doesn't require water, which is in short supply on the moon. Now, To the Moon and Beyond is a new podcast series from the Conversation marking the 50th anniversary of the moon landings and looking ahead to the future of space exploration, the moon's place within it. And you can listen to it here if you want. Now, another problem is the low gravity on the moon. It's only a sixth of that on Earth, and over time this can cause problems such as muscle and bone loss. Any permanent lunar settlement must minimize these risks, for example, by making exercise a requirement. Although few space agencies have released any details about their plans yet, we can probably assume that the first bases on the moon will have to be pre-built and transported to the moon from Earth so they can be used right away. Now, my comment here is that the Russians have said that their moon base will be run by robots, not by humans. And they will only send human cosmonauts to their South Pole moon base in the event that the robots can't do certain functions. So going back to this article, any such base, the lunar base, must reliably maintain breathable air, meaning oxygen must be provided and carbon dioxide must be removed. The International Space Station, the ISS, uses electrolysis to break water down into oxygen and hydrogen and vents captured carbon dioxide into space. Power sources. An essential ingredient for any base is a power supply. The ISS typically supports 6 astronauts when fully crewed and requires 75 kilowatts to 90 kilowatts of power from everything from life support and powering scientific equipment to water recycling. Depending on the number of lunar colonists and the tasks they carry out, this power requirement could be considered an absolute minimum. The opinion would be to use solar panels, but if the base is located in equatorial regions, then solar panels will only produce power for 14 days consecutively, followed by 2 weeks of darkness. So colonists would therefore have to store power in batteries and use it during the dark period. If the base was placed on the moon, south or north pole, however, solar panels would receive constant sunlight. I guess that's why China and Russia want to have their bases on the South Pole. They would have constant sunlight for solar energy. And more on the moon and beyond, you can, from Neil Armstrong's historic first step onto the lunar surface, present-day plans to use the moon as a launch pad to Mars, and you can hear from academic experts on the video that they have here. Now, nuclear reactors are a more reliable alternative to solar power, but you know what nuclear reactors do. They contaminate everything with atomic energy. So you can have, if anything goes wrong, you're going to irradiate the whole of the moon? Is that what you want to do, really? We can't even take care of our own Fukushima here on Earth. How are we going to take care of cleaning up the moon or keeping the moon clean? Now, going back to this, in recent years there's been a lot of interest in miniaturized fission reactors. The problem is that even small reactors can weigh several tons, which is a problem given that they need to be transported from Earth. There's also the risk that we may end up spreading nuclear material on a currently pristine location. Another possibility are radioisotope thermal generators. These produce energy by generating an electric current from the temperature difference between a radioactive material and a cooler external environment. On Earth, these are not very effective as room temperature is fairly warm, but in the shaded areas of the moon it gets very cold. These devices have often been used as a polar source for deep space probes, which travel too far from the sun to harness solar energy. But for lunar colonization, a very large number would be required as they are not very efficient at converting heat into electricity. Each potential power source has its advantages and disadvantages, but the solar panels are the best option if you can place them in the right location. Food and water. Clearly, the inhabitants of a lunar base would have to survive on a primarily plant-based diet. Meat and other foods would have to be provided by supply ships, as agriculture requires a large infrastructure in place to be practical. It is, however, theoretically possible to grow plants in lunar soil. Computer models show tomato and wheat could germinate. The plants will require a substantial amount of space to be able to provide enough food. The base must be made big enough to accommodate for this. While many nutrients for crops are available in lunar soil, the absence of nitrogen, which is essential for plant growth, remains a significant challenge. There are also high levels of metals such as aluminum and chromium, which can be toxic to plants. And we can remove some of these problems by using a technique known as hydroponics, growing plants in water rather than soil, with LED lights providing artificial sunlight. For example, this can be performed in an internal windowless room. A disadvantage of hydroponics is the amount of water required. Water can easily be recycled during current techniques from sink and shower runoff, sweat, and even urine, although inevitably some will be lost and need topping up. Luckily, it is possible to extract modest amounts of water, ice, from the moon, especially at the poles. The final major consideration for any future lunar colony is health and safety. The potential risks of exploration are well documented, and we have trouble recovering ill people in inaccessible locations such as the Antarctic, where medical support is limited in the summer months and virtually non-existent in the winter months. This suggests that a lunar base would have to be medically self-sufficient, require more weight to be sent to the moon in the form of medical equipment and trained personnel. Ultimately, we have the technology to make a lunar base viable, but no amount of innovation can completely negate the risks involved. Whether such a base goes ahead or not will depend on this calculation perhaps more than any other. The question is whether we as a society have the stomach for lunar settlement as well as lunar lettuce or not. And this is on The Conversation. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events, events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.